Hello, 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 and welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us this evening here on blackdoctor.org. You are watching House Call with Dr. Gigi, and I know we haven't seen Dr. Gigi in a while, so we're so excited to have her here this evening. And thank you all for joining us. So let us know where you're watching us from. We always like to know where people are watching us from all over the world. We like to get the most exotic places. So look, you can even make some places up. We won't know. So
You're so
we can put that in the chat. We would like to know where you're watching us from. Um, Also, if you know somebody that needs this information, share it on your page, tag them, let them know that we're having this really important discussion tonight here. And so, like, and also like and share the broadcast, right? And then finally, if you have any questions, if you have anything you want to share, if you feel comfortable sharing, please drop that also in the comment section. We want to be able to have an open forum for everybody to be able to share and be a part of this discussion, because this is all about you and this is all about getting some information that could potentially save a life. So tonight is we're talking about a heavy topic, and I know we're talking about health and wellness. So health and wellness is always, it has a tendency to be heavy, but this is really heavy because this is about relationships, and it's not about relationships in terms of the good side. This is a relationship
right.
in terms of domestic violence, and so we all know, some of us have been black our whole life. We have seen it, and we have know somebody that has gone through it, and it's unfortunate that is that close to all of our lives. And so we're going to talk a little bit about domestic violence. Thank you, Catherine, for sharing the program, and we're going to talk about it. And we're also going to talk about how to get help and how to get out. And so that we're going to give you some solutions to the problem of domestic violence. And I'm going to speak to it from a male perspective because, as we all know, men are the more often the perpetrators of domestic violence. I'm going to speak to some brothers, and I'm going to speak very frankly and very honestly about this tonight. And so I'm just happy that we're here, and I'm happy that we're having this discussion because it's much needed. Dr. Gigi.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I've missed you. I'm going through a transition right now, going from one institution to another, and I hope to be settled in by January. And I'm very excited, but that's been why I've not been on. But I promise to get into a regular schedule beginning in 2023. Can you believe we're talking about 2023? It's crazy. But I'm so glad to be with you this evening. And before I introduce our wonderful guest, which I just met like 10 days ago, but was so impressed by her and her story and wanted to share her with as many people as possible because she's amazing. I want to start off by saying that this is a story that is not just my professional interest, but is also personal to me because I was a victim myself. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more and what that looks like. So I'm very open about sharing, sort of my story because, sometimes people see you and it's like, oh, Dr. Gigi, blah, 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 you've got it together. And yeah, for the most part, I do, but I'm not perfect. And I feel like if I can get into the situation that I was in, than anybody can. So I hope that you will see that people who are in these situations never in a million years thought that they would be in them. And to your point, Mr. Ellis, yeah, men tend to be the perpetrators, but actually, when men are the victims of domestic violence, it is so hard for them to acknowledge and get help. There's a lot of shame around violence against men. And I can tell you that one of my colleagues, uh, a man, was being assaulted regularly by his wife, and he was so ashamed, and it was very hard for him. I also want to tell you that this program is also about how to be helpful and supportive to somebody who is going through a situation like this, because what we don't want to do is aggravate the situation. And I'm going to give you one statistic before I introduce our lovely guest. 75% of women who are killed in the context of a domestic violence relationship are killed when they're trying to leave.
Mm.
So we have to be very, very careful. This is one time where the person experiencing the violence has to be the one that leads because she or he knows the situation best. I'll stop there because obviously I can talk forever, as you already know. And I'd like to welcome Ms. Tercola Durham to the show. Welcome.
Thank
Um,
you.
can I
Thank
say
you.
how I met you?
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
so Bishop Webb has been on this show before. She was Pastor Webb. She got consecrated as bishop, and she's actually the first bishop in Washington, D.C. from Temple of Praise. And there was a brunch in her honor. And this is where I met Mr. Cola. And I found out that she is got a film that's going to be on Prime pretty soon. And this, I started to hear her story. So I said, wow, this is amazing. And she's an amazing human being. So
Thank you.
welcome. And I'm going to have you sort of introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to come on your show. Thank you, Mr. Ellis, as well. So I am Tercola Durham. I'm originally from the Stacks country, Goldsboro, North Carolina. I currently reside in Charles County, Maryland, and I am a domestic violence survivor. I went through it for 10 years, and tried to commit suicide to get out of it. Um, it was, I never thought that I would be in a situation like that. Like, how could I possibly be in this situation, educated, a nice person in church? Never in imagined year, in a million years that I think that I would actually go through it. And it was, at first it was just the mental aspect, which sometimes is the worst. But the physical aspect, you get over it quicker than the mental aspect for me anyway. Um, and then it turned to the controlling. It turned to being pulled away from my family, secluding you from others that could possibly help you. Um, and I mean, it was just a lot of the infidelities and making me feel like I was nothing,
Mhm.
and making me feel less than what God said I was, and I believed it. I just felt like I lost all power. I mean, all power that I had. I felt like I was nothing. That no matter what I've accomplished, that I was nothing. And it got to the point that it was so bad that I just couldn't take it anymore. So, I was like, well, let me just take my life so I won't have to deal with this anymore. I would think things would get better. Um, I moved 10 times in the 10 years. I had 10 different addresses to get away. The judge in Upper Marlboro knew who I was when I would come in to get restraining orders, and then I would come back and dismiss them. Um, it was I was ran off the road, guns put to my head. I mean, hit, just, but that mental aspect, that verbal abuse is torturous. It's I'd rather have dealt with the physical more so than the verbal abuse. But it was the worst 10 years of my life. And then having kids, not with the individual, but I had boys. I was raising boys in the midst of this. And they were seeing these things happen, and and it wasn't good for them because I had to put them in therapy after going through all of this. I mean, one of my sons, he dealt with some of the things more so than the other, because I had him around that situation. And it was just like the worst feeling in the world, to feel like you lost yourself to someone who didn't create you.
Mm.
Like, that's the worst feeling, to feel like you're nothing. I mean, to be told that you're nothing and you believe it, and it took a lot of healing, it took time. Like, I still deal with some things. I'm not where I used to be, but it took a long time to heal. And therapy was very helpful because not only to make you realize that it wasn't you that was creating this and causing this, but to know why you allowed this to happen. I think that part of therapy was the best. What caused you to allow someone to come in and change your whole entire life? What issues and what self-esteem issues were you dealing with? What happened in your life to cause you to feel less than? Because learning that will allow you to not attract that same individual again. I think
Mm,
that was the best part of going to therapy and then reaching out. One thing I didn't do, I didn't reach out as much as I should have for help because I was embarrassed.
mm,
Being educated, being ordained in the church, it was an embarrassment, you know. And I did hear people say, "Well, that's what you get because you think you're better than anyone else."
Mm.
mm,
And I'm like, I just wanted to get an education. That doesn't make me better than anyone else, you know. And it was, I dealt with it a lot. Sometimes by myself, I would talk to, my bishop and talk to people in church, but then I felt like they couldn't help me because they wasn't going through it, so they wouldn't understand. And that was a lie that I told to myself. Even though they haven't gone through it, you can still talk to them so they can pray or refer you to someone that they may know. But I was embarrassed. I didn't want to talk about it. Um, it was so detrimental to me. But I thank God I'm here now to be able to help someone, to get out of it before it's too late. And just to encourage someone that they're beautiful, because I mean, just having someone in your corner, encouraging you, talking to you is so important. And I'm thinking if I would have opened up um, within those 10 years, I would have stayed as long. But I think that was my go through so that I could help someone else. But that's me.
Well, thank you for sharing all that. And it is very tough. And I think it's important to know that with these relationships, you don't go from 0 to 100.
yep.
One thing about the people who perpetuate this um, are smart, they are predators. They can see who is the person. For me, partly is an occupational hazard, but I'm always willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. I look, at people, and so forth. So it happened gradually, the courting stage, which should have actually been a tip off. They're overly, overly nice. I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread, which for me was great because I had just come out of a relationship, right, where somebody, decided to leave me. So I was very hurt. So the courting, and initially it was like, wow, this is nice. But then over time, that after, the relationship was cemented, that the it was almost a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
It was a different personality. Um, things that, I appreciated about him coming with me everywhere became like I was suffocating. I couldn't go shopping for, food or
Yeah.
shopping for clothes. And what you said about that whole thing with the family, I'm very, very close to my family, but because he had issues with my family and they could see him
Yeah.
too, it became like smaller and smaller and smaller. And, it was gradual. So I forgive myself because it didn't come up all of a sudden, all at once. It was gradual, and it was all about the control. And to your point, he never struck me. But the reason that I say that I was in a violent relationship is that he would destroy property all the time.
Mm,
You know, take a chair, and, one time he destroyed a whole room. He carried around a knife, things like that. One time we were driving and somebody cut us off, and he wanted to for me to open the trunk because he was going to take a iron, what do you call it, the
Tire.
to tire iron, thank you, to hit the other a person, so I was walking on eggshells, not because I was necessarily afraid I would get struck physically, but like, what is going to happen next? The unpredictability of it all. And that was tough. This is what I teach. I write about domestic
Mhm,
violence, but
mhm.
I will say this when we start to talk about how we got out of our respective situations, it's because I knew so much that I was actually able to get out safely, which we'll talk about.
Right.
But anyway, I'll stop there because it sounds like you have something to share, Mr. Ellis.
Well, unfortunately, domestic violence has touched my life in many different ways. Uh, my father was an abuser. Um, uh, I'm, I still experience a little bit of shame in saying that out loud. Um, and we know statistically that if you live in a household with an abuser, there's more likely to become one yourself because of that's what you see and what you know. I went the other way. I was the kid that made that promise to himself. I would never do something like that because it was such a helpless feeling, hearing what was going on and not being able to assist. And then fast forward after my college years, and I'd gone on and been in a relationship myself, and I had two college friends um, that were murdered at the hands of their abuser, and they had gotten one had gotten out of their relationship and was moving on, and the person was still trying to control her and ended up killing her, and he was a judge, and so there's not um, there's no degree, there's no field that says this person is going to be safe, this
Right,
person is going to be an abuser versus a socioeconomic status or not. It
right,
is something that is in them um, that is broken, and it's unfortunately to that violence is taken out on somebody else, and
right.
so I would say to anybody that's continuing to watch this program, that's watching this program with us, to really, think about it. And I'm going to put the number up again in terms of the National Domestic Violence Hotline. If you know somebody that's in a situation and you need to help them, they can probably help you there. The hotline, if you're in a situation and you have a moment, because I know about those controlling where you got to check in, you
Check
got
it.
how
Mhm.
are you? It becomes every time you cannot step out of the house, you cannot find any space. But if you do have an opportunity to get some space, um, jot that number down and call it because you got to, if you can't get help, find a way to get some help. Find.
So, Mr. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for, saying that even now you still have, that sense of a little bit of shame. One thing that I've learned as I've gotten older, you've heard me say I'm 63 now,
Mhm.
is that we all have our things, right? And our things are different. And I don't know of any human being that has not dealt with something where there may be shame involved. And so that's why I think for me anyway, it's important that I sort of share because guess what? We're all in the same boat. We need to show grace to others, but also to ourselves.
Mhm.
So, Mr. Cola, please, I'd like for you to take us through the anatomy, if you will, of the relationship and how things, happened and sort of what ultimately, when did you decide to leave and how did that come out?
Sure. So, I met the individual in church, and it was the courtship made you feel good. I had just got out of a relationship, and I wanted love. I wanted to be married. I was in the church, and I thought that I loved the individual because of the materialistic, physical aspect, not the connection or anything. And I wanted to be married, and then oh, he's into the church, so this could be a good deal. And gradually, I mean, the first when we got married that night, it was it was not happy. You're supposed to be happy that you get married. And I remember after we said I do, and we came outside of the church, my dad, I can remember this, said it's not too late to turn back. And
Mm.
I was like,
He's a
what?
prophet.
He said that.
Yeah.
And none of my family stayed to the reception. And
Mm.
I'm really close to my family. Um, my mom got sick, my grandmother got sick. It's like they got sick and they left. And that night, just things just didn't feel right, but I ignored it. That first week that we were married, he disappeared for like 3 days. I had no idea. He took my car. I had no idea. I called my bishop. We called hospitals to try to find out what was going on. Until this day, I still don't know where he was.
Mm.
But I let it slide. And then the manipulation, the knowing my weak moments, where to really, hit you hard, and then I started noticing the wanting to go with me everywhere. And I've been always been independent, and I'm like, this is a bit much, but I ignored it. The first year of being married was hard. You're supposed to be in marital bliss, but it was difficult. I mean, because of the controlling,
Mhm.
just the threats, just the outburst, and I moved. That first year I was like, I can't do this. And I let him talk me into coming back. I love you. I'm gonna go to counseling. I'm gonna be different. So I went through this for 10 years. Um,
Mm.
and the last year, so I went through the trying to get my sons to go live with their dad because he didn't want them, he just wanted it to be us. So that's when I started seeing the separation, even though I didn't allow my kids to go. I remember getting my master's, and my family celebrates these moments. He secluded me from my family and was like, no, I just want to take you to dinner, and my family was like, what is going on? But he's my husband, so I want to please him. So I did it, and I just started seeing that more. My friends that I was close to in college growing up, they started to see me less and less. I started to get the phone calls from different women, telling me different things about him. And as crazy as this may sound, and as embarrassing as it is, but I don't care how people think of me now. I used to, when I used to find out he was cheating, I used to try to make myself look like these women because I'm like, if that's what he wants, then maybe I need to be like this. So I lost all of who Tercola was in this, and then every year I would go through the same thing. I would have women put notes on my car. He would blame me for it. I don't know how that works, um, but he would push me.
It's called flipping the script,
Yes, he
which they
did.
do all the time.
Yeah, he did that a lot. And because of his background that he told me about, kind of made me intimidated, because of having guns and who he knew and his life. And that wasn't my lifestyle. So it made me feel intimidated. And then when I would leave, he would threaten, well, what family member do you want to be killed first? So
Mm.
it's like I had all of those things. And then every year, like I said, every year. So the last year, I thought we were doing much better. I mean, this guy has cheated on me with so many different women. Women were saying that they were pregnant. I remember when we had separated one time, and I came to church, and he hit me in church because someone said that I was attractive. And
Mm.
I
And that was
remember
your fault. That was your fault that they said
it
that.
was my fault. Then there was another situation in church where I was consulting with one of the pastors, and he approached the pastor thinking that we were had something going on, which wasn't true. So it was embarrassing. And then, me being a professor at University of Maryland, I was an adjunct professor. He used to come sit in my class to see
Mm.
what guys was in there. And then when I was working on my doctorate, we would have to work in teams, and he would call the numbers from my cell phone. And if it was a guy, why are you talking to my wife? Like all of those things. And they
Mhm.
would ask the professors to move them to a different group. I've
Mm.
lost business partners because they were men, because he didn't want me dealing with them. I couldn't go anywhere other than church. Um, the controlling thing was crazy. And the last straw was I thought we were doing better,
Mhm.
which is crazy as it may sound. On the 10th year, I thought we had crossed that. Okay, we're kind of getting settled. Even though he's done all these different things to me, and found out he had moved in with someone, a whole nother lady. And actually before then he had told me a lot of stories, lies or whatever, and I used to catch him in them all the time. And I remember him putting me out, from a place that he had, because I found him in a lie. So he used to be controlling and do things like that. And the last straw, when I like I said, I thought we were doing good. um, this is how crazy this is. I walked in the house. He had a whole different cell phone. He had two cell phones. He fell asleep with the cell phone that I didn't know about. And I woke him up and was like, "What is this?" And I told him to open it. Do you know he tried to convince me that it wasn't a phone? He tried to convince me, "You're saying things." And I'm so messed up in my mind.
Mhm.
Like,
Gaslighting.
Yes.
That's the term.
yeah.
So
Gaslighting.
let's
Yep.
let's talk about that because you should see the movie Gaslight. Let me tell you about that.
Yep.
I saw the movie when he had moved out,
Mhm.
and it spoke to me. It's a movie from the 1940s, I believe,
Okay.
with Ingrid Bergman and Charles Boyer, and it's about this man who's older than the woman, and he just is courting her and everything, and then they move to London, and all of a sudden he starts gaslighting her. What does that mean? He would give her a brooch, and then he'd ask her later, where was it? And she's like, I don't know. It disappeared. He was the one that was stealing it, right?
Yeah.
Or, everything was in her mind,
Hmm.
and he was slowly driving her crazy,
Yes.
right? Until somebody saw what was going on and wanted to
Mhm.
save her. But that to me is the worst part of all of this, is that you start to question yourself,
Mhm.
your abilities. And it's crazy making. You don't even
Yeah.
know what the reality is. And because your social network has closed and has really been reduced, you don't have other people that can say, no, that's not you. One time I came home and he had destroyed a room, and I said, what happened? And he goes, what do you mean? I mean, it was like it wasn't even there, to your point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So gaslighting is real, and
Very.
I this business about trying to flip the script, that's very, very common,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and you really start to doubt yourself.
Yes. I doubted myself for so many years. He made me feel like I was nothing. And it will always be, well, I can date lawyers and judges. And I'm like, well, why are you still here?
Hmm.
And it was for the purpose of making me feel like I wasn't anything.
Hmm.
And it always was, well, I remember a time where a young lady was calling my house phone. If you're gonna do something, don't bring it to the house, you know. And it was, I don't know how she got the number, or I don't know why she's calling. And then come to find out, she was in my house, and he was like, well, I don't know how she got here. And it made it he was making me feel like I was just like the dumbest person in the world, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and then to do that with the phone, and I'm like, I'm holding the phone in my hand. You don't see a phone. It's, you know, it's not a phone. It's the phone that I had. And I'm like, well, the other phone is here, you know. And he was like, well, and then you're crazy. I don't know what you're talking about, you know. It and that was my last straw. I mean, because I dealt with the infidelity, I dealt with the sexuality issues, which will make you feel less than a woman.
Mhm.
It That's the worst feeling. And I was made to feel like it was all my fault. Like
Mm-hmm.
everything I did was wrong. I couldn't do anything right. And you talk about eggshells. Oh my, that's the worst. Especially when you're paying all the bills.
Yes.
Mm.
Me
And
too.
it's like you have to be on eggshells,
Mm-hmm.
or it's like um and the age difference mattered. I was 8 years older.
Mm-hmm.
At you know, and then it was always, if is he gonna come home tonight? It would be times where he wouldn't come home weeks at a time, and
Mm-hmm.
then will lie and say his grandmother died, and I kid you not, I think he had about 8 grandmothers.
Right.
You know, it was that, or it was his brother died. I'm like, when did you get a brother? I mean, the lies, the continuous lies, and then it would be all the different women and I would call these women and they would tell me his name was a different name than what his real name was, or he was real close to a guy, and they would switch up names
Oh,
and
uh-huh,
switch cars.
uh-huh.
I'm an adjunct professor working on my master's and doctorate, and this is what I'm dealing with, you know, and trying to
Mm-hmm.
raise two boys, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and working a full-time federal job, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was lies when I would talk to the women. Oh yeah, he told me that you guys were on divorcing, and you were
Mm-hmm.
talking about splitting, trying to split what houses you guys own and cars. I'm like, we live in an apartment. I'm not understanding. And it was the lies
Mhm.
was crazy, you
Mm-hmm.
know, to hear these women say, well, yeah, you guys have a 1-year old. I'm like, we don't have a 1-year old.
Wow, wow.
Yeah, I felt like I was in a movie.
Yes. Well, you talked about your own struggle with, of course, feeling worthless. I got very depressed, but I
Mhm,
want to speak to that because this is a way of coping, if you will.
mhm,
When women start to, or people who are victims start to drink or get depressed, that's actually a coping mechanism, right?
mhm, mhm,
So it's very important, especially those of us in the healthcare field, not to say, well, you need to stop drinking, rather to look at what the root cause of it is,
mhm.
Yeah.
because we can actually further traumatize
Yeah,
somebody rather than helping them.
yeah.
And Mr. Ellis, you brought up, the what you saw as a child. Just to give you some statistics, um, depending on the individual, after they've gotten, what they, beating somebody within an inch of their life, basically they can turn on the kids. So where there is violence against, let's say, the mother, there can be violence against the children. And so for us, again, in the healthcare system, it's important to ask, and find out about that. But let me ask you, Mr. Fuller, what was helpful to you during this time, in terms of your friends or family? Did they have a sense of what was going on, and what was helpful?
Um, I hope I can say his name on here. Bishop Staples was helpful. Bishop Staples, Elder Harrington, Bishop Webb, Pastor Anderson. Um, they were very helpful because I was so close to them during this time. And I remember Bishop telling me, Tercola, when you see red flags, don't think they're going to go away. And I ignored him. Sorry, Bishop. I love you. But I ignored it. And, you know, I wish I would have listened to them a little more. But I also know being in the church is certain things that they will let you try to figure it out because they can't say, you need to get a divorce. But when I started to share more and more, um, I felt like they were supportive of whatever decision I decided to make. But then it got to a point that I was too embarrassed to continue talking to them
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
talking to anyone. So, you know, really, it didn't help anymore because I wasn't opening up to them about what was really going on after we had initially talked and, and everything. Um, my mom sort of knew. Well, my mom knew because when I would cry and call her, she kind of knew. My best friend walked away from me because I kept taking him back.
Yep.
And she was like, I'm not going to deal with you anymore because you keep taking him back. What are you going to wait for him to kill you? But she's the one who saved my life. She called the ambulance just in time when I tried to commit suicide.
Oh,
I
wow.
called her. Yeah. Um, so I just wish I would have talked to people more, um, during the situation because I probably wouldn't have stayed as long. I didn't really seek much help until after I tried to commit suicide and I was put into a behavioral hospital. I laugh about that now because I'm like, me in a crazy house, you know, I'm just still baffled from that. But that's when the help came. Sitting around talking to other individuals who have tried to commit suicide but are heavily medicated. I wasn't on medication. And listening to their stories, listening to what they've gone through gave me a sense of hope, as weird, as strange as that may sound. And that's when I feel like God started to minister to me the most, is when I got into that quiet place. And
Mm.
they wouldn't let me go home because of the fact I tried to commit suicide. So I had to stay in there for a week. At the same time, I had no leave at work because I was constantly taken off from having high blood pressure, having anxiety attacks, stress from being in this situation. And I was an adjunct professor at the same time. My best friend, I hope they don't hear this. My best friend jumped in to take over my class. I was donated leave from I don't know who at this time, but God ministered to me more than ever in my entire life. And I just remember asking them for a Bible because God kept giving me Galatians 5:1, which is my favorite scripture to this day. And this is in 2012 when I tried to commit suicide. And I remember asking for a Bible, and they gave me a Bible, and I read it. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ have made you free, and be ye not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. When I read that scripture, I was like, God, if you get me out of here, if you remove soul ties from this man, I promise you I will not turn around.
Wow.
And I just know, and my best friend was there. I had nobody in church knew. Bishop, no one knew at that time. And I remember he came to get me from the hospital because we were still married. So I couldn't be released until he signed
Oh, wow.
for it. When I got out of that place, I did not look back. And it was only by the strength of God that I didn't God gave me the strength to
Mhm.
walk away. I think it was a week later that he threatened me again. And this probably was like the 15th time I've called the police and I went and got a restraining order and I didn't take it back this time.
Mm.
And I know that was because of the strength that God gave me. I promised him I would serve him if he did that for me. And he did that for me, which is why I'm always telling people, having a relationship with God is very, very important because he do strategically put people in your life. But if you not are not lined up with Christ, how you going to know or have the discernment to know who's there to help you and not to manipulate you or take advantage of you. And when I came out of there with my head high. He threatened me again, called the police, and he thought I was joking. And he came back after he was served, and I called the police, and they arrested him. He could not believe it. So because I did that, and it was something different, because I didn't take the restraining order back, he went to another level. He went and got my name, my face tattooed over his heart and then got my name tattooed above his privacy. We don't have kids together, but he got my son's name tattooed right here and our dog name, the dog that he kidnapped from me.
Oh, jeez.
So that was another level. It was like, well, I need to try something else now
Wow.
because
So
she's allowing.
escalation, and
Right,
That's
that's a
right,
right.
behavior that's
right,
escalated. Yes.
right. So he did that, and at this time, my older son was working out, and he told him, if you don't get away from the door, I'm gonna hit you in your head with a bat. So he left. Here comes the next escalation because I lived in a private community and you have to have a code to get in. He started to mess with women where I live so that he can get into the building. And I would come home from work and he would jump out of the stairs.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he would try
Mhm.
to jump out of the stairs and, the threats. And I eventually had to move because of it. But he would always find me. He would follow me. He would
Mhm.
always change his telephone number and call me, like constantly bother me. I think the last time he called me it's 2022, was 2020, still apologizing. Um, but yeah, I finally just had the strength to, like, I couldn't do it anymore. I realized when I was in the mental hospital, I don't belong here. And the doctor told me, you don't belong here.
Mhm.
But I hated that it took me to try to kill myself because what if succeeded?
Yeah.
What if I succeeded? I wouldn't be here. But I want to stop others from feeling low, feeling
Yeah.
like, you're nothing. And somebody who didn't create you, who don't allow you to be able to breathe, their words don't mean anything at
Mm.
all. And I see a lot of young women deal with that. They care about what the person says about them, and I despise that.
Mhm.
I mean, because it does tear women apart. But not only
Absolutely.
that, I had to go to therapy to figure out how did this I let this man infiltrate my spirit like that.
Yes.
It
Yes.
was some underlying issue that allowed me to feel less than, that I
Yes.
can let a man come in here and change my entire world around.
Yes.
So I went to therapy about that to try to figure out why. And I found out so many things about me, my past, how I handle certain situations. Because now you cannot infiltrate my spirit at all.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because I've learned who I was. It's very important you have to know who you are. You have to know what your weak spots are you definitely praying about it. But I'm telling you, I look now, sometimes I can be driving and I would start crying because I remember days I would be home like I'm never going to get out of this.
Mm.
Can you imagine feeling like this, feeling like you're in
Yes.
bondage for the
Yes.
rest of your life?
I do. And so I want to talk. Oh, thank you for that. That is such powerful testimony, and it's a testimony to your strength, and you're keeping your promise to God. It's funny. I had a similar moment. It was when he was arrested
Mm-hmm.
and he had borrowed my car. I didn't know where my car was, so I was walking around looking for my car. And I looked at the heavens and I said, if you help me with this, I will take care of the rest.
Mm.
And so I went in another direction and I found the car.
Mm.
But, I think that what's harder for these younger women, especially, is that our culture has become a culture of humiliation.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they're getting used to this from social media and
Yep.
so forth. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the warning signs. One of the warning signs happened to me very early in the relationship, and it was kind of I was stuck. And that is when somebody says they're going to commit suicide, the perpetrator. Because I always tell people if he's threatening to commit suicide, that's when murder suicide happens.
Yep. Yep.
And and that really, because I knew that, that's really what kind of kept me. And I had to be very careful about extricating myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I did. He, thank God, got another job in another state. Um, because he had gotten arrested, I was freaking out because that could have jeopardized the job.
Yeah.
I ended up having to put $5,000 down that I did not have, but I had no choice
Right.
to cover the lawyer, and thank God that the case got dismissed.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, the warning signs from the standpoint of danger are when you hear the suicide. The other thing that complicates things that I did not have to deal with was children. So if a person, a woman usually, is thinking about leaving, you really have to have a safety plan.
Yeah.
You should try to find somebody that, and I'm using he and she because that's the
Mhm.
majority. It doesn't mean that it's
Right.
only he and she that
Right.
are in those roles.
Right.
I think it's important that I state that repeatedly
Yes.
because, you know, as I said, the men have a lot of shame with being victims. But
Yeah.
the time to pack up is not when you're arguing. That just gives people time, right? The
Yeah.
time to pack is, you know, if it's kids, to have a go bag that may not even be at your home, to
Yeah.
try to find out if there is somebody that doesn't know him so that you can have an escape route.
Right.
I was very scared after he left. I
Mhm.
actually went around and showed everybody his picture. The security in my building, they knew because he lived with me.
Mhm.
The people at work, the security, every place that I went to, because I wanted them to sort of be my eyes and ears because I was still worried. I mean, now I think that, you know, I mean, I can never say never. And
Yeah.
the thing that was really frightening to me was that he would harm my family.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
that was so scary to me.
Yeah.
So, you know, I want to get to your movie
Yes.
because I just want to make sure that everybody knows about it.
Okay.
So please tell us about your work. This is
So
wonderful.
yes. So Strip from Insanity was my first film. My first, it's a short film slash. It's kind of it's 55 minutes, but they came about. I remember sitting on my bed November 22nd, 2021, and it was a spiritual moment for me. I was going through some different things, and I've been acting. I've been an actress since 2019, and I was just sitting and I was talking to God, and I felt the Holy Spirit show up in my room, and it was just like me and the Holy Spirit. And I remember sitting there, and I knew God was telling me that I was under an open heaven. Heaven, it's time to tell your story. I got the title in 2006. I could never write. Um, and I used to go and it's like, God, how come I can never write the book? And he was like, because you're not totally stripped, you know. And so finally I just it's like I released everything and I forgave him, you know, even though he wasn't there. I like forgave everything that he did to me because I had been still holding on to it. And I decided it was like, yeah, I'm gonna write a film because I think film dramatics, you know, this generation like dramatics. So, you know, I said I'm gonna make it into a drama. I'm gonna change the names, audition actors, and I prayed about the actors I wanted to use, and I knew it was God because the actors I wanted to use told me that God told them to reach out to me.
Wow,
So
wow.
I knew God was all in this. And you talking about healing? Every time I would write and talk to my team, it's like a layer would fall off every time I would write a different chapter. And something that I think is important for anybody, no matter if you're going through domestic violence, hopefully you're not, or anything, to journal.
Hmm.
To journal. I journaled so much, and that's where I got my story from going back, looking at my journals, because there was a lot of stuff that I didn't remember that I journaled about. So when everyone sees my film on Amazon Prime, and you hear the voiceovers from the actress who's portraying me, those are my journals that I would write while I was sitting in the bathroom.
Wow.
Hmm.
And you know, the when it first comes on, it's a journal. It's a voiceover about how I allowed someone to come in and just take my entire being away from me,
Mm.
but then the voiceover at the end is of power, is of I looked in the mirror and now I am free, and the story, um I didn't really go into a lot of details, because it was only 55 minutes. I just touched some pieces of the events that I went through. And I even reached out to domestic violence organizations, just cold called them and was like, hey, I'm having this film on October 1st. And I did it on the first day of Domestic Violence Month. And I had organizations come and bring material, and it was just amazing. But even when you're doing stuff that is productive, God will test you. And I say that to say I had a budget. I paid for this film out of my own pocket from my regular 9 to 5 good government job, and I had everything set, set budget. I started getting these unknown callers. Only other person used to do that to me was my ex. So, it's like he was trying to stop me from allowing this to get out.
Mm.
And I got scared, Dr. Gigi, when you're talking about, I got scared because I'm like, what if he tries to do something to me because I'm putting this story out? So I did. I went and got a concealed to carry, to
Mm.
protect myself. I went and got, a gun, got my HQL because I just didn't know. And then not only that, I set the budget. I was ready to go. A week before I would start the film, my finances was shot with some unexpected things that came up. My dad passed away suddenly, and it was a week before, and I was like, God, I can't. There's no way I'm gonna be able to take care of these contracts. I had already wrote contracts with my actors, and I had to feed them, and I remember God telling me November 22nd, 2021, you're under an open heaven, but distractions will come. But just know that I got you. You have to trust me. And I was like, no, I need to figure out a plan B because I need to make sure, I want to do this film. Good credit, everything. Well, I'm going to go to the credit union and I'm going to get a loan. They're not going to deny me. I have good credit. They denied me. I still don't know why to this day that they denied me. But God showed up in a way I would have never expected at all. And of course, I completed the film. I partnered with some domestic violence organizations. So many different women have been coming up to me, telling me that they're in the situation now. A couple of them have gotten out after they saw the movie. So I'm not going to cry, but that touched me. And these were young women, like young women. And after that, I've been a guest speaker with domestic violence organizations. January, I'm taking the film to a couple of organizations in Maryland to show the film to them, and it'll be on Amazon Prime in January.
And what is the name of the film again?
Stripped from Insanity.
I put
Stripped.
the link to the IMDb page in the comments.
Thank you.
I did a quick search for it. It's all over. You just put "Strip from Insanity" into Google. Google does have some good things. You can find some good
Yeah.
things in Google.
Yes.
It's not all the best. So
Yeah.
so
So,
please go find it. The
yes.
trailer is on YouTube.
Hmm.
You can watch the trailer there, and then I know when it hits Prime, I'm gonna be all over it, so I can justify that payment each month. But
Thank you. I appreciate it. And then I have another film now that I just finished. I was telling Ellis, we just wrapped on Sunday, um, called Feathers, and it's based off of Psalms 91:4. He will cover you with his feathers. And it's about three families who are struggling in their faith. One family is dealing with, the young lady is committing adultery because she feels like her husband is not living up to his standards. Well, he's a former gang member who gave himself to Christ, and now he's trying to minister to other gang members on both sides. And she's like, well, I need money, I need this and I need that. And he's like, we have to trust the Lord. And then the second family is a young lady who's a nurse who's struggling, wants to know who her father is. But the mom doesn't want to tell her because the father did something to her when they were young, well, raped her.
mm,
Um, and the mom doesn't want to tell her, so keeping family secrets. And in the third family, there's an individual who has a different lifestyle, and he's trying to do right by himself and by his father. His father's very hateful, and he's being bullied by gangs. And then it's so many different exciting action moments that are going to take place. You will see angelic moments, but you will see that God is covering these families with their feathers. There's going to be some twists and turns in that, and I'm proud of it because Prince George's County Film Office gave me a grant to do this film in PG County.
Wow, that's
So yeah,
beautiful.
I'm happy about that. And not only that, it's going to be on Netflix. So I know I'm so excited because I was like two films in like a year, which is I never thought I would be an actress, first of all, especially after 40. And then to be, a filmmaker, a director, a producer, and
Wow.
then, to get a grant, a significant amount of grant from Prince George's County. And to also I had real doctors and nurses on my set Saturday for one of the scenes at Trinity. And then one of the doctors sent an email to Senator Ellis in Charles County to set up a meeting to talk about getting the grants in Charles County because I am a Charles County resident. I just partnered with the PG County resident to get the last grant, but now they're talking about possibly getting the grant, those type of grants, arts, in Charles County. So I'm like,
Wow. That is
exactly,
so terrific. That's fantastic.
yeah.
I
So
wanted to just sort of make sure that we brought up this point because
mhm,
family members, just like your friends who got very frustrated with you when you kept going back,
mhm,
um, the thing that I think is important is sometimes or most of the time listening is the most important thing.
yeah,
So many of us, when we see a situation, we want to do something immediately. But this is a situation where doing something can actually be harmful.
yeah,
So let the woman or the man lead in this. They know when the person is at their most violent time. And it usually is when the person's been drinking or when there's been an escalation.
mhm,
The anatomy of a violent act is that first the woman is walking on eggshells.
mhm,
She doesn't know when it's going to happen. Sometimes a woman might provoke the guy to get the beating over with if the kids are on their way home from school. She wants to make sure that they don't see this. Or before he starts to drink more.
mhm,
Then after that, and I would really recommend that you watch the scene from What's Love Got to Do with It? When
mhm.
you remember that
Yeah.
scene where Tina Turner is telling him, "Oh, why don't you come to the pool?" And blah blah
Oh
blah.
yeah.
He says something, and then in that instant, he looks at her like, "What did you say?
Right.
Crap!" And
Right.
what does he do? All this stuff. It's in front of the kids,
Mhm.
and then the honeymoon. He then gives her a present.
The president, yeah.
That's the least likely time that she's going to leave, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Because as a woman or as a person, we all want to be shown that love.
Yes.
And the other aspect of it is that the, and this may seem paradoxical, but the person might still love their perpetrator. They want the violence to stop.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for us on the outside to not judge that. So
Right.
listening, continuing to listen, not necessarily coming up with a plan because only she knows
She
best.
right.
And that remembering that suicide, when he threatens suicide, that's dangerous. When there's an escalation, okay, I had a patient once where the her husband started sleeping with a gun under his pillow. That was extremely dangerous.
Yeah.
So, and there are so many resources that are out there.
Yes.
And so you're not alone. It happens to all of us from different walks of life. Not all of us, but we,
Yeah.
there's no descriptor of what somebody who's a victim or a perpetrator looks like.
Right.
Remember, I thought it was when I met you and you were like, you went through domestic violence. I was like, you?
Yes, me.
You? I was
Yeah,
so surprised.
yeah,
I
yeah.
couldn't believe it.
Well, and you know what else? A few months after he moved out, I had breast cancer. And I'm
Mm,
convinced that that had something to do with, first of all, I missed getting my mammograms for 2 years. And then just the incredible stress.
yeah.
So this
Yeah.
affects, you've talked about your spirit. This affects body, mind,
Yes.
soul. It is affecting everything.
Yeah, I
Um,
developed chronic kidney disease. I had hypertension. I was always stressed. They even said I couldn't have any more kids, but I knew that was God because I ended up having a son, with my husband now. Um, but I wanted to go back and talk to you about the person saying that they wanted to commit suicide. As funny and crazy as it may seem, that's what made me stay because I felt like he needed me.
exactly.
But then I realized he was telling other women, he would go and talk to other women and say he doesn't want to live anymore. And that's how they would gravitate to him. And that caused me to stay a lot more because I felt like, oh, I can't leave him.
Mm,
Or it was something that he would lie about in his past that happened. And I felt sorry for him. But
Yep,
that was all manipulation, the narcissistic behavior that I learned that that's what was happening. He was using that to try to get me to feel sorry for him,
yep,
and then the guns under the bed, I dealt with that, and then it was, oh, somebody's after me, which would make me scared because I have two sons, and then I remember we were living in an apartment and he was messing with a young lady that lived over the apartment, sending her sexual pictures or whatever, not realizing you are breaking this young lady's heart by not being with her. In return, she was from the islands. She had some guys come over. Do you not? It's like you put me and my sons in a dangerous situation because of this. So it's not only, the domestic violence towards us, it's other doors
yes,
that can be open when you're playing with someone else's heart,
yes,
because I went through that several times, with that. But that, you know, talking about you want to commit suicide and saying, like I remember him telling me he drunk Clorox to try to kill himself.
oh
Now
my
that should have been
God.
a telltale sign for me because we were not even married at that time. I just thought he was cute
He's
at the
taking you
time.
on it's an emotional roller coaster, right? So
Yeah.
it keeps
Yeah,
you on that emotional roller coaster to keep
Hmm.
you, leaning into him, uh, uh,
Yeah.
attached, and then y'all shared a secret. He told you they were lies,
yes,
but y'all have this shared experience,
Yeah.
a secret that comes into. So there's a lot of things that goes into this. One of the things that we need to recognize in terms of the psychology of a person that's an abuser. I know Sharon put in the comments about them being a narcissist.
Hmm.
There's some narcissistic personality traits there. There's some antisocial, sociopathic traits there to be able to harm someone, whether it's emotionally or physically, and not feel any remorse about that. There is some sociopathy in there. There's depression. There could be some PTSD, particularly those that were are ex-military. Um,
Or
uh,
who were in the streets
yeah,
dealing with, yeah.
or in the
Yeah.
streets. The streets can use a PTSD
Yeah.
too. Um,
Mhm.
surprisingly, or not surprisingly, depending upon your point of view, is the profession that has the highest number of domestic abuse are police officers.
Mhm.
And so, there's estimated, 40% of police officers commit some sort of domestic violence. So, um, I'm sorry, it's Elise. She's using her friend's account. Sorry, Elise. Elise. So, really have to, and then there's a lot of personality traits. Both of you described that really early, over the top courtship, early on, trying to get you emotionally attached and emotionally, so where that is like like they say when a duck gets born and they imprint on the first,
Mhm.
that the imprint they want you to always default back to is that person in that initial courtship. And
Yep.
that carrot that they're gonna dangle out in front of you, and you're gonna
Mhm.
be like, but he wasn't always like this. And
Right.
that's the narrative that you create to yourself
Yeah.
Yep.
and continue to let you put up with the reality of his behaviors
Mhm.
because he wasn't always like this. And
Right.
because he's giving you another example. So, and I'm using he, or she, it could be interchangeable.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that person is giving you another example. And so, really, those are some of those signs. And when you're in it, it's hard to see it.
It is.
As a child, I remember, but I do know that fear of every time the key hit the door and not knowing what person was going to walk through, right?
Right.
What
Right.
person was going to walk through that door? Has he been drinking? If he's drinking,
Yeah.
is he? Because he was rarely a happy drunk. My father was more of a angry,
Angry.
controlling, drunk. And so, if you came in and you're like, ooh, and I could tell by just how he greeted us all, whether it
Mhm.
was going to be a good night or a bad night. And so, what Dr. Gigi was talking about in terms of it turning to the kids, yeah,
Mhm.
it turned to us. Um,
Oh, wow.
not in a sense to where it was something that you would see on TV,
Mhm.
but it would be an overreaction to something that is an everyday thing, like not taking out the trash. Why am I getting a belt
Yeah.
open for not taking out the trash?
Right.
And little things like he would throw the trash on my bed if I didn't take the trash out. Like it was like really mentally abusive and it was controlling. To the point where it was like we always had to make sure that he was happy.
Yeah. So, did it change your relationship with him at all? I mean,
Yeah,
how?
I don't have one.
Oh, till this day.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Okay.
it's very superficial
Okay.
because we didn't have that time. You know, like
Yeah.
I remember when I was getting married that telling um, my my wife that and literally having like breaking down crying because he was there. First, he didn't want to come. He said he wasn't going to come
Mhm.
because he was paranoid. He thought my wife was after his money, and I was like, "Man,
Wow.
really?" But he finally broke that down, and then he's there, and we were talking about shaving, right? And it was this moment, this watershed moment. I was telling, I damn remember telling my wife and I was telling my counselor when I was going through counseling about
Mhm.
this moment about us talking about shaving, and I was 27 years old, right?
Mm. Mhm.
And it was the first time we'd had like that one of those moments where like you would expect a father and a son to have talk
Right.
about shaving, talk about we never talked about girls, we never talked about shaving, never talked about dating. There was all there's a lot of that stuff I had to learn on my own. I had to learn how to drive on my own. My mother would let me drive around the neighborhood. It was like a lot of things. I was a kid that got the ride to the sporting events because
Yeah.
dad wasn't there. So it was a lot of neglect uh,
Okay.
there because he was out doing his own thing, which we found out later on. He
Yeah.
was, you know, and had a separate life. And so I think those scars, uh, wounds heal, but the scars will remain, right? And so
Mhm.
when I'm listening to your story, I'm thinking about that Bible verse, I can do all things, right? So
Yes.
you
Through Christ.
were
Yes.
saying how, you didn't know how you could do it, but you found the strength. And I was like,
Yeah.
that was. But also, as we're, in this program, and I want people to recognize that there's a strength that we have to tap into, right?
Absolutely.
And and you have to really set discipline. I mean, you talked about discernment, right? And I was like, that
Mhm.
was one of the spiritual gifts that the Bible actually says you should pray for, right? That
Mhm.
pray for discernment.
Right.
And so having that discernment of being able to recognize when somebody's being genuine and transparent and when somebody is not.
Yes.
And so, um, but there's one thing we all want to be loved. And
Absolutely.
for somebody
Hmm.
to prey upon that is really the ultimate violation. And that is
Yes.
what whether it's physical violence or emotional violence, it is really preying upon that person's genuine need to be loved. That's really the biggest travesty of it all. And so,
Right.
Yeah. I agree with that. But I want to commend you for not becoming your dad, because I've seen that happen a number of times. And I think in this situation, my ex, it was his dad was that way. And like you said, 9 times out of 10, people will pick up the habits of their parents.
yeah,
So I really commend you, Ellis, for being a stand-up guy and not taking on that generational curse.
Mhm.
it is. I used to write a blog, and that's one of my favorite personal favorites. It was called Breaking Generational Curses. And I had this moment with my son. I might start tearing up in a minute. But I had this moment with my son, and I'd come home from work, and he was 3 at the time, and he had what we call the wife beater, unfortunately,
Mhm.
t-shirt,
Yeah. Hmm.
and he had a shirt on there, and he took his shirt off, and he said, "I want to wear my." He called it his armpit shirt because his armpits were at that
Hmm.
time. I want to wear my armpit shirt because I want to be like Daddy, right?
Oh,
Hmm.
oh,
Yeah.
oh.
And so you have that moment where you're like, okay, I'm having an influence
A
on
positive influence too.
on his life, right?
Hmm.
So he doesn't, and both my children don't know that. Like they only know who I am today, and
Yeah.
worked hard to create a life for them where they don't have to live in fear of a parent.
Yeah. Yeah.
You should never the most primary person in your life. You should not have to fear them, and it still affects me, and it affects it does have it affects me in different ways. I mean, because
Hmm.
the scars, they don't go away, but you know, I made a promise to myself as a child, and to this point, I've been keeping it.
Yeah. Dr. Gigi, I want to ask you what made you decide that you couldn't take anymore?
Great question. And thank you, Mr. Ellis, for sharing that. I think, first of all, we we all three obviously believe that being vulnerable in a public space is the way that we can serve others the best. Doesn't make it easy.
Right.
So
No,
just thank you. Especially I think for you as a man, Mr. Ellis, because there are not that many role models, so you are a role model for
Absolutely.
showing us that behavior in terms of that vulnerability and your capacity to change the narrative. So okay, so you asked me what happened. I'll tell you. We were invited to a dinner with two couples, yeah, two couples, and one of my best friends was in town visiting from Puerto Rico, and the one couple was talking, and they were kind of going back and forth, and it was very cute. And I said, I deserve that. I don't know what it was about watching them.
mm,
And I said, I deserve that. And yeah, and that's the day that I decided I didn't want to do this anymore.
Yes.
And I was lucky I didn't have kids. I had a couple of miscarriages, and it was very bizarre to see his behavior during that time also. um, Not the most supportive, but yeah. And I actually told that story to my friends. I said, you guys are the ones that got me to
Helping you.
leave. Yeah,
Right.
but I mean, it was when he got arrested. I'm like, oh no, God, please, this cannot appear on his record.
Yeah.
So, and then the last week that before he moved out, because it was very difficult. I could not tell my family about all this. I've
Right.
got a brother who I adore, but he's a hothead. And so I was so careful. But the last week, I asked my dad to come into town, and my dad was great. He was like an actor. Hey, how are you? Very, you know. But before he came into town, I had found some, because I was paying all the bills, found this bill because he had also said a lie about where he was. And it turned out that he had been in town, had rented a car, was staying in a hotel. And I opened the bill. I was by myself and I started to cry, not because I cared about him, but how he really played me. Like he really played me. He thought I was a.
Yeah,
And then he walked in. And although he never struck me at that point, I thought he was going to hit me.
he was gonna.
And he said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And I said, "This bill." He goes, "Well, what's wrong?" And then you learn to recognize that look,
Yes.
where he's not inhabiting his body. And I
Hmm.
set the bill down. I said, "It's not a problem. Don't ask me how," but I sucked the tears back into my eyes.
Mhm.
And I said, "It's not a problem." And I just walked away and then things calmed down. But at that moment, um, it could have ended very differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm grateful that it didn't.
Thank God. Thank God. We
Yeah.
have our angelic protectors, but
I,
I
I know
see
I
it,
do.
right? I see it.
We all had a
The,
different purpose, right? We all had a bigger
absolutely,
purpose
absolutely,
for,
absolutely. I
for our
see that
lives.
our time we've gone over,
Oh,
but yeah,
okay.
but this
It's
has been
okay.
so great. So I just want to thank you, Ms. Durham, and
Thank
I'm going to be
you.
looking out for your movie on Prime and your 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 program on Netflix, your movie on Netflix.
I'll
Uh,
text you.
okay, please, please,
I
please, because
will.
we want to promote this too.
Thank you. I
Thank
definitely
you,
will. I
thank you.
appreciate the both of you guys. Thank you for sharing your stories, because it's not easy. And a lot of people don't want to talk about their past and what they've gone through because it's still embarrassing. But, I just feel like God wants us to be willing vessels to help other people. I think we go through things a lot in life so that we can have a testimony for
Mhm.
others. It may seem harsh, like, well, why did I have to go through this? But you're here. We're here. We have people that need to hear our story and see that we are still here. We're still thriving. We're still joyous. We're happy. We have peace,
Yeah.
and people need to see that.
Yep,
Yeah.
Mr. Ellis, closing comments.
Well, as they used to say in church, you cannot have a testimony without test. And so
Yes.
we all had our test, and hopefully we all passed because we're still here and we're sharing the
Yeah.
story because we understand that there's strength in the sharing.
Yes.
So when you found yourself in a place that you never thought you would end up, you heard other people's stories and found your strength.
Yep.
Dr. Gigi, you're telling the story. You were watching another couple and they were just sharing themselves in front of you, and you found your strength to say, no more. And I think we
Yeah.
all have that moment. It could be an innocuous moment. It could be you walking to the grocery store and seeing a family, a traditional nuclear family, the way you imagined your relationship to be. And that
Mhm.
could be that watershed moment that changes your life. But
Yes.
I would say it'll come to you when it's time for you to get it.
Absolutely.
And so just, stay girded in prayer, find your way out, find your escape route, plan it
Mhm.
first, and then use your escape route. I put the number on the screen. I'll put it up again. But many churches have uh, safe havens for domestic violence. There's many organizations out there. There is a way out, and then that's when the real work starts. You
Right.
have to deprogram yourself from what he has done or that person has done to you. You have to deprogram yourself, and you've got to let go of the shame and move
Yes.
into your spiritual calling. I could go on, but we're gonna we're gonna end it there. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Y'all have been
Thank you.
fantastic for joining us. Uh, you have another fan. You got another fan. I don't want
Oh,
you got another fan in me. So whatever you need, you have my email, Dr.
yes.
TV, and you've got my number. If you
Yes.
need anything, I've got a lot of friends in DC area. You need
Thank
something,
you.
reach out. I got you. I will definitely whatever resources I can make available to you, I will make them available to you because your
Thank
story
you.
needs to be told and
Thank you.
be poured into. So we're going to continue to pour into you and continue to wish you and your family the most success.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys so much.
Bye. Happy holidays,
Happy
everybody.
holidays.
Take
Yeah.
care.
Good night.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.